I think, in our fourth week of this series called Endgame, as we look at our endgame and how to live with the endgame in mind. So welcome to Chaparral. Before we start into that, though, a couple of things I want to point out or just share with you. One, thanks to everyone who helped make those blankets for Globe, the Arizona Reservation Mission Ministry, up to the reservations up there. They took them yesterday, actually. They took them up there, and it was great. They prayed over the blankets, prayed over the kids, and such a simple thing with a big impact of just giving someone something to stay warm during the cold winter. So thank you for that. Also, I want you to start thinking about Christmas. Start thinking about Christmas. I know it's October, but we're putting together a pretty exciting Christmas season here at Chaparral. With Follow the Stars, we're going to have some new additions and some changes. We're going to have a really cool series of messages during that season of Christmas, and then also Christmas Eve services will be different this year. So we really hope that you will do something, and that is this. Right now, before Christmas starts, write down the name of somebody that you want to invite. I mean, actually proactively do the work. Write someone's name down, a friend, family member, someone at work, someone at the gym, someone you know that you want to invite to Follow the Star or to our services or whatever. But please invite someone to these things, and you do that by writing their name down, praying about it, and how to get them to come with you and share that time together. All right, the last thing I want to share with you today before we get started is an update on Frank's version of the apocalypse. Now remember that, yeah, I know, right? I had said to you that when I was a kid, like super little, that I always thought that Jesus would come back when the Cubs win the World Series. And it's like getting more and more real every day, right? It's kind of a scary thing. In fact, I was at Andy's, when was it? Like, I don't know, maybe Tuesday or something, and someone said, wow, it is so weird to see the Bears and the Cubs on TV at the same time. I'm like, I know it's October, right? The Cubs are usually at home watching the Bears from their couches in October in playoff season. But it's kind of weird that they're actually in the World Series. In fact, last night before the game started, I was a little nervous, a little apprehensive. You know, it's Game 6 and all this stuff's going on. You're kind of worried. And so I was in the backyard working on my message and my Bible out on the back deck, and the wind picked up, started blowing a little bit, and the pages began to flip. Like, wow, that's kind of weird. And all of a sudden it landed on a certain page. And I looked down, and there on that page that the Bible was blown open to was Ezekiel 19:3. And it said this: she raised up one of her cubs. He became a young lion, and he learned to catch prey, and he devoured humans. Which I guess means you can't dodge the cubs forever. Get it? Dodge. Okay. I tried. But here's the thing. Some people do that. They use the Bible like that. They use the Bible for that sensationalistic headline, tabloid, look at things of life, as opposed to what it was trying to do and trying to teach us. And Revelation is especially bad about that, or people are bad about using Revelation in that way. They use the tabloid version instead of digging into what it actually says. And to be honest, Revelation is an incredibly complex, confusing, and controversial book. And so most of the time, churches, by and large, ignore most of the book of Revelation. They just don't talk about it because it's controversial, confusing, and complex. And so we just kind of ignore it. But that's not our job. Our job is to pass it along. And in fact, the book itself was not intended to be complex, controversial, or confusing. It wasn't. It was understandable in their day. What's hard for us is that the literature type, the way it was written, is not familiar to us today. It was a kind of literature we call apocalyptic today. And it was like poetry, or a short story, or a business letter. It was a kind of literature. And they understood it. But we, because we don't have that literature around much anymore, we don't really understand the way it was written. It's kind of like music lyrics, right? Music lyrics are a different kind of literature. They're not quite poetry, but they're sort of poetry. They're not quite story, but they're kind of story. Like if a country song tells a story, right? And usually your dog dies in a country song or something like that, but it tells a story. Well, this kind of literature was like that. And by the way, music lyrics, I'm a big fan of music lyrics. I pay attention to music lyrics. Here at Chaparral, I got to say that we have some awesome music here. So I want to thank Kim and Mel for the awesome music they do here and the entire band. Yeah, thank you. They do a really good job. And sometimes it's so good. There you go. All right, there we go. But sometimes the music is so good you miss the lyrics. And in the Bible, we don't have the music, we have the lyrics. In Revelation, there's a lot of sections where we have the lyrics to songs. And they're beautiful and they're powerful and they're about celebration and God's return and hope and help and all this great stuff. We have the lyrics, not the instrumentation, not the music. And so for me, sometimes I pay attention, close attention to lyrics, whether it's a hymn or a choir piece or a praise song. I like to pay attention to what the lyrics say. Like the song we just sang. It was called Hosanna. And that word is a Hebrew word that means, oh, save. It's a cry for God to save, which fits great with the book of Revelation. One of the lyrics you just sang says this right here. It says, I see a generation rising up to take their place with selfless faith. That is Revelation, right? Part of our job of this last few weeks is to do the hard work of looking at this very complex book, doing the hard work so we can pass it along. It is easy, and a lot of churches do this, to ignore the entire book, just not talk about it. But that is to betray what the earliest Christians saw. They believed that this book could speak to you. It spoke to them, and they worked hard to make sure it got passed along from generation to generation. So we have a generation that passed it on to us, and there is a generation rising up after us. That's our job to pass it along to them, which means we spend some time talking about our responsibility to pass along this message. Or how about this set of lyrics from that same song? Heal my heart and make it clean. Open my eyes to things unseen. We said last week we were going to approach this book as explorers, not experts. Right? We're not going to go looking for certain codes or looking for certain things that we believe in. We're going to have open eyes, open hearts, and just explore the book and discover what God has in store for us. No pressure, just exploration, just some learning, just some discovering. Open eyes to things unseen. And those things lead to this last one, this last part of the chorus, which actually is my favorite part. Break my heart for what breaks yours. Everything I am for your kingdom's cause, as I walk from earth into eternity. Right? This book, Revelation, is not just about the future. It's really about today. It's our walk in the present, in the moment, our walk today to eternity. So we move toward this end game. We want to know how that applies to our life today. So we're walking toward eternity. And one of the core principles we talked about in that walk was that our end is the end for us. That's one of the big keys here. Revelation is not just about the big end someday. It applies to our end, because after all, when you die, when I die, that is the end, right? For us. There is no second end for us. It's our end. So what it says here in this book, this very confusing, complex, and controversial book, what it says in that book should apply to our lives today. And so we're on this walk to eternity. And when we get there, eternity, there's really only two options. There's only two very simple ends, if you will. We talked about those as well, and they're best summarized in this ancient clip that I found on the internet. Take a look.
Spanning the globe to bring you the constant variety of sport, the thrill of victory, and the agony of defeat. The human drama of athletic competition. This is ABC's Wide World of Sports.
Brought to you by Ford and your local Ford dealer, who invites you to see the 1983 Ford cars and trucks. Have you driven a Ford lately? By Midas, with over 1,200 Midas muffler and brake shops. Trust the Midas touch for any muffler or brake work you need on your American or imported car. And by Honda portable generators for camping, hunting, boating, even charging your car battery.
I could ask the question, who has never seen that before? Raise your hand. Oh yeah, it's pretty bad, right? Okay, this was like, when I was growing up, this was like the thing to watch, was ABC's Wide World of Sports. And they had this clip at the beginning of every show. I think it was on Saturdays. I think it's not on TV anymore. But anyway, they always had different thrill of victories, like different things going on. So the soccer player or whatever, thrill of victory, right? But the agony of defeat was always the same guy. It was always that ski jump dude. And his name was Vinko Bogataj. Vinko Bogataj. He was the agony of defeat. And he's this guy who was just a ski jumper, and you saw what happened, right? And he becomes this icon of American failure, right? He is the agony of defeat every single Saturday. What's interesting is that after he retired, he went back to Slovenia, where he was from, and lived a nice, quiet little life in his nice, quiet little village. Had no idea this was going on in America. And so 20 years later, they invite this guy back for some big, huge banquet with like Muhammad Ali and all these big people in 1981. So he comes back and has no clue that when they call his name, he has the biggest standing ovation of anybody. In fact, Muhammad Ali asked for his autograph. So in that moment, right, the agony of defeat became the thrill of victory. But here's the thing. We only have those two options, right? We're going toward this end game, and we talked about the two. We talked last week about the thrill of victory, right? Revelation 7, the big celebration, multitude of people celebrating because God won. It's over. Suffering is done. Persecution's over. Trouble's over. We won. And then there is the agony of defeat we talked about a couple weeks ago. How the agony of defeat is terrible and horrible. We don't want to be part of that. But those two ends are determined by what walk to eternity you're on today. So I want to talk about that. I want to kind of drill down and remind you that this book was written to a people who are trying to figure out how to walk to eternity in a time of persecution. That these earliest Christians were really suffering at the hands of Rome. They were a minority. They were a people that were being blamed for stuff that they didn't do. They were trying to do the right thing all the time and suffering for it and being killed for it, losing their businesses, losing their families. And they asked hard questions like, I'm following this Jesus, but he doesn't seem to be winning. I'm following Jesus, but was that the right thing to do? And maybe you, in your life today, are facing some kind of trouble like that, some kind of persecution like that. It may not be like what they went through, but it's real for you. And maybe you're suffering, and you're struggling, and you're sitting there thinking, man, am I doing the right thing? What did I do wrong? How do I take one more step today to make it through today? Well, your suffering is as important and as meaningful as what they went through in the first and second centuries. And so this book was written and speaks to you and to me. So last week, we gave you 3 signposts of how this book, which is so old and so ancient, can speak to your times of suffering and trouble and difficulty, your walk to eternity today. And here's the first one. We said that these early Christians didn't see this book as some future hope, like what's going to be way in the future. They were looking for hope today, how to get through the next day. The second thing is that despite what was going on in their lives, they believed that God was still in control. That no matter how bad it gets, God is still on his throne. And the third thing they believed was they needed to hang on. That giving up was not an option. They'd have courage and strength and take that next step. They believed that hanging on to hope was at the core of who they were and wanted to pass that hope along. So today, I want to add 3 more signposts that come from this book of Revelation that can speak to our hope and our courage for today. And the first one gets a little strange. Like I said, this is going to be a little tough today. We're going to dig into some meat in this book, Revelation. It might be a little confusing for you, but I want you to hang with me because there's some pretty important things here. And the first thing is that this book isn't linear. Like most stories have a beginning, a middle, and an end, right? Romantic comedies have some beginning, some long, drawn-out, boring song in the middle where they find each other again, and then some sappy end, right? There's a formula to that kind of stuff, and we know how that works. Revelation's not like that. It kind of cycles. It kind of layers on itself. And often when it has references, or it talks about other things, they're not like one-to-one correspondences. Remember back when you took the SATs when you were a kid? They had these things called analogy relationships. Anybody remember these? Like paltry is the significance as redundant is the discussion, or austere is the landscape. Anybody remember these? Me and Stacy? There's a few more. I mean, I hated these things. Did you hate these things, John? They were awful because they didn't make any sense. I never got them. I never understood, but that's what they were. They were these relationships, one-to-one. Paltry is to significance as, and the answer here is banal is to originality. I would have missed that one. But that's the thing, but Revelation, thankfully, is not like this. Instead, what it tries to do is kind of have these layers. It was more interested in like the situation that was going on, the hope, the feelings, the emotions. And they saw their stories of God in the past as not like Bible school flannel graph kind of stories you remember in the past. What they wanted is to take that emotion, that feeling, that hope, and layer it into their situation today. Not just talk about it, but like combine them together. If you remember when you were growing up too, is tracing paper. Remember tracing paper? Where like a photograph, you lay a piece of paper over it and you can trace on top of it? It was kind of like that. They took their stories from the past and their situation in the present and layered them together and then traced over it. So you had this deep, thick story that had many, many layers to it. And so that's the first thing I want to talk about is that in Revelation, you had these cycles. So like last week, for example, we had the big celebration. Remember that? You know, people singing and celebrating and multitudes, and we won, and it was great. That was in Revelation 7. There are 19 chapters in Revelation. How could you have the end in the middle? Because the book cycles. So the core of the book, Revelation, actually cycles like a wave in three main cycles, okay? There's a cycle of 7 angels, and these 7 angels have scrolls in their hands, and they open up 7 seals. 7 is an important number in the Bible. In fact, a lot of these numbers are important. 3 is an important number. 40 is an important number. 4 is an important number, because like the 4 corners of the earth, right? North, south, east, and west, like a compass. 7 is important. Very important number. How many days are there in the week? 7. But 7 doesn't fit into any solar or lunar calendar. That's why you have leap year every year. It doesn't fit. You got to reset the calendar, right? Because 7 was more symbolic. It meant God worked for 6 days, he rested for a 7th day, and it's complete. So 7 has this complete kind of connection with it, all right? So you have 7 seals. Then you had a cycle of 7 trumpets that angels blow, and things happen. Then you had another cycle of 7 bowls that they pour these bowls out and stuff happens. So you have 3, which is important, 3 cycles of 7 things that happen. And so what ends up happening with this is that you get this kind of sense of character, of God continuing to be part of these cycles. And in fact, each of these cycles gets worse. It's kind of like movie sequels. Anybody here see that great Christmas movie, Die Hard? It's a Christmas movie, by the way. It is. But in the first movie, Die Hard, John McClane is this everyday cop, right, who flies into L.A. and has to take down these bad guys in this big tower. Remember that? That was the first one, back in like 1980, whatever, okay? But then, in the second cycle, the second movie, it gets worse. Now he's blowing up airplanes with a lighter, or something. By the last movie, this John McClane guy can run motorcycles up in the air and smash out helicopters. You know, it's just kind of crazy stuff. But every movie, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and he's a bigger character. Well, in these cycles of Revelation, the same thing happens. In the first 7, the seals, it says about a quarter of the earth is destroyed. Then it recycles. There's an end, restarts, and now a third of the earth is affected. It ends, restarts, and then 100%. So you have this movement. And part of the idea of this cycling of Revelation is this. There are more than one end. Like I said from the beginning, our end is the end for us. So your cycle, your story matters to God. It does. As much as these big cycles matter, your cycle matters. Your end matters. And so the book, the way it's written, reinforces that. There'll be more than one end in the world. There'll be many ends, many persecutions, many times of suffering, whether it's Rome or cancer, whether it's an empire that's causing Christians to suffer, or whether it's you dealing with depression. Whatever that is for you, that suffering matters to God. That cycle matters, and God's aware of those cycles. The second signpost I want to get to is this, and that is that only God, the creator of the world, can uncreate the world. That sounds kind of weird, but I was a child of the Cold War, and we're kind of seeing that occur again today, more recently in our culture. The fear of, nuclear holocaust and all that kind of stuff, that someone's going to push a button and the world's going to end, that kind of thing. It was a big deal growing up. I remember when I was a kid having to get in the hallways for drills. You cover your head in case there's a nuclear attack, that kind of stuff. I remember those days. We worried about that. But Revelation says very clearly that there's only one person who's going to uncreate the world, and that's God. And it teaches that, not by just saying it, but by kind of giving you a set of images you can kind of hold on to. And I want to kind of take you through that so you can see what this book is trying to do. So in that second cycle, I said there was 7 angels who blow 7 trumpets. All right? The first 4 of those trumpets they blow affect natural things, the earth stuff, right? Which makes sense. 4 is like north, south, east, and west. The whole earth is affected, but there's 4. The second 2 trumpets, 5 and 6, are supernatural disasters. So first 4 is natural, next 2 is supernatural, and the last trumpet is a celebration. It's like, woohoo, it's over. Okay? We'll look at those first 4 trumpets just for a second. We're going to dig into those and see what they teach us. All right, so if you turn to Revelation 8, it says in Revelation 8:7, the first angel blew his trumpet, and there came hail and fire mixed with blood. And they were hurled onto the earth. And a third of the earth was burned, and a third of the trees were burned up, and all the grass was burned up. Actually, that's to be a third. Okay, so here's the thing. You had 3 things happen, each with a third. Look at the next one, Revelation 8 and 9. The second angel blew his trumpet, and something like a great mountain burning with fire was thrown into the sea. A third of the sea became blood, a third of the living creatures in the sea died, and a third of the ships were destroyed. 3 things happened, each with a third. The third angel blew his trumpet, and a great star fell from heaven, blazing like a torch, and it fell on a third of the rivers and other springs. The name of the star was Wormwood, and a third of the waters became wormwood, and many died from the water because it was made bitter. Okay, so now again, you got 3 things, each with the third. Last one, Revelation 8:12. The fourth angel blew his trumpet, and a third of the sun was struck, and a third of the moon, and a third of the stars, so that a third of their light was darkened, and a third of the day was kept from shining, and likewise the night. Does anybody see a pattern in these first 4? Like maybe a 3, right? You have 4 things happen, each with 3 things affected at a third. It's kind of like Sesame Street. Like today's apocalypse brought to you by the number 3, right? I mean, that's the kind of what's going on. It's all about these 3s. Why? Why would this person be drilling in our heads over and over again 3s and a third? It wasn't because he was trying to be accurate with the numbers. He was trying to reference you to something else. And that something else he's talking about is the point. And to get that, you got to go all the way back to Genesis. In Genesis 1, chapter 1, we have the story of God's creation. It's kind of like a poem of how God made the earth. He made the earth in how many days? 6. Rested on the 7th, that day of rest, that celebration day. But in that 6 days creation, it's actually 2 sets of 3 days. On day 1, God separated light and dark. On day 2, he separated waters below from waters above. In day 3, he separated water and land. So days 1 through 3 is like putting a kid in timeout, right? When your kid's misbehaving, acting up, the first thing you got to do is get him to stop. So you put him in timeout. So days 1 through 3, God puts creation in timeout. Just stop. You go here, you go there, you go in the corner, you just stay where you're at. In days 4, 5, and 6, he takes those things he put in timeout and makes them move like he wants them to move. Go clean your room, right? So in day 4, light and dark become sun, moon, and stars to mark days, months, and years. Day 5, he puts birds and fish moving in the things that he stopped in day 2. And in day 6, he puts animals and plants that move on the places that he separated in day 3. Make sense? You kind of with me a little bit? Okay, there's 2 sets of 3 that are parallel. Now, take that idea and put that in layer paper, or like a tracing paper, on top of Genesis 8, or Revelation 8. And what do you get? You get a decreation story. So if God created by doing sun, moon, and stars, and then birds and fish, and seas, and all that, and then land animals, be created in that way, he uncreates by beginning with the earth, and then the seas and rivers, and then the sun, moon, and stars. You with me? So the whole point of this confusing section of Revelation is simply this. If God made it a certain way, God's going to take it apart a certain way. That means that only God can uncreate. No one's going to push a button. No one's going to surprise God with a nuclear holocaust. Only God can uncreate. He made us. Only he can unmake us. So don't worry about that. So here's 2 things we've said so far. Number 1, your cycle of life matters to God. And number 2, there's a lot of big worries out there, a lot of big concerns, a lot of big fears. Let God handle those. God made it, only God can unmake it. Which brings us to our 3rd and final signpost today. If God can take care of the big things, then we're left to deal with the important things. How are you walking to eternity today? Like, what are you doing today? Not big stuff, like right now today. In Matthew 25, we kind of get an answer to that question. It says, when the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the angels come with him, then he will sit on his throne of glory. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate people one from another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And he'll put the sheep on his right and the goats on his left. We get this image, the thrill of victory on one side and the agony of defeat on the other. There's only 2 destinations, folks. Thrill of victory, the sheep, agony of defeat, the goats. And so how do you get there? What does your walk to eternity look like to end up in one of those 2 groups? He says here right next, he says this in Matthew 25:35. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you took care of me. I was in prison, and you visited me. In all the complexity, in all the uncertainty, in all the controversy, it comes down to things as simple as taking blankets to kids who are cold in Globe, Arizona. It comes down to volunteering your time to travel to Haiti, to take care of a country that had been ravaged by a hurricane and people in need of shelter and medical care and kids who just want to be held. It comes down to visiting a friend in the hospital who's alone and worried about test results coming in. It's as simple as being a friend to someone who just can't find a friend, who is suffering and hurting and just feels isolated and alone. They just feel like there's no one that cares. You care. It's that simple. So in all the big stuff of the end times and the end game, it comes down to how you walk out of this room today. How do you take care of the hungry and the stranger and the thirsty? That's something that every single one of us in this room can do. We can walk like this. When we walk like this, we can sing songs that say things like this. Break my heart for what breaks yours. Everything I am for your kingdom's cause, as I walk from earth into eternity. Let's pray together.